That is so cool. Years ago, this isn't probably relevant to this conversation. I was a sound man. I was a stagehand in Ohio, and I got to play. I was the sound man for a minor league professional soccer team. But I got to do the sound effect, and I literally had a slide whistle and a vibra slap and some cassette tape sound effects of like and I'd have to try and be watching the game and have a cassette tape queued up, and when something happened on the field, hit the boing boing noise or the sad trombone.
Yeah,
this is
you got to be your own Foley artist, which is really neat.
Yeah, but and it was like in a game, I'd probably have 50 opportunities for some sort of funny sound effect, and usually hit about 3 of them. By the time it's like, oh crap!
The pace of the action in a baseball game is kind of hard if you've got to reach and grab and do all the things. It's a little different. All right, so I hit the record button about 20 seconds ago.
Oh, okay. Well, okay.
Or a minute ago, according to the clock.
Okay.
My sense of time is terrible. My name is Thomas Zachary, and this is a KAAMP. Now, thanks for listening. This is the Knox Area Artist Networking Platform. And today I'm out at Maryville College to interview a man that has graciously invited me into his studio. So will you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Carl. Actually, that's Carl Gombert. I teach art here at Maryville College, and I make things.
I like that. All right. So I first was exposed to your work at Crafty Bastard a few years ago when you had a lot of your mandala series up there. Okay. And you've been on the list to have a conversation with ever since.
Cool.
Whether I had a microphone in front of me or not is totally irrelevant, but it just so happens we get to share this. So what's your creative process like? I'll just go ahead and dive into that.
Well, there are lots of ways to answer it. It's a really interesting question. The creative process, I'm a sort of wannabe comedian, so I have lots of shtick in my pocket here and lots of punchlines. And sometimes I joke with students that there is probably no thought that human beings can have that Bob Dylan hasn't put into a song lyric somewhere already.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
And there's a line of his that I actually used to have on my studio wall. It's from Maggie's Farm. The verse basically says, I get up in the morning, fold my hands, and pray for rain. I got a head full of ideas, and they're driving me insane. And that second part is, I got a head full of ideas. Yeah. I don't always know where they come from, but my process, I always keep a notebook in my pocket or sketchbooks around because I know it's important to write stuff down or sketch it and draw it.
Yeah,
and I will,
when they come to you.
When they come to me. And it's also interesting, I've gone back to look at old sketchbooks from when I was in high school, and the stuff that I was interested in when I was 16 and 17, I'm still interested in now. Some of those big thematic areas have always intrigued me. But so I'm sketching, I'm drawing, I'm noting things, and then, but I'm also a planner in a sense. I talk to my students sometimes about, there's a spectrum in the arts between planners and proceeders, and nobody's purely on one end or the other. It is very hard for me to just proceed, to take a blank canvas and look at it and say, okay, what's going to happen?
Well, that's when you have all the options and you're scared to just make the first move, right?
Yeah, and I at least... I used to. It's interesting that you saw the mandalas first because I'm also a sort of quasi-realist painter, and
which
big
is amazing, and I really enjoy those pieces. And I've seen some of them in the airport, and I like them. They astound me because there's no way I could try. That's so far beyond my wheelhouse.
Well,
I appreciate it.
Well, cool. And but there's a lot of anxiety involved in sort of the art world gives you all these mixed messages. First of all, you must be consistent. You must find your niche, and you must find that one tree that you're going to pee on forever and ever.
Right.
And, and nobody else can pee on that tree, and all of that. And then so to sort of do that for years and then switch directions, I thought, but you get old enough, and it's like it's all part of the same thing.
Just another thing.
Do that. But so as far as the process, the mandalas are actually interesting because they are a lot more improvisational than they look. And so they're a way, I think, and I'm making this up very much after the fact, But I think at least at some level, I was looking for a way to make work that allowed me to just follow the work rather than try and lead it.
I get that.
Get in the studio and say, okay, what it needs darker parts, or it needs red, or and without as much of a preconceived idea. So there's a little bit of improvisation or room for experimentation in the portraits, but they're pretty straightforward. That it's if the nose is too big, you make it smaller. If the nose is too small, you make it bigger. That's not really experimentation. That's just drawing. And
you have a more clear defined goal, what you're trying to get to.
Exactly, and that's what I mean by being a plan. I know it's going to be. You mentioned the airport. I actually have to go pick up. There's a big portrait of my mother that was just there that I've got to pick up, and it was like it had to look like her, and it was going to be, and there's the mandalas, though, even though they have this high degree of structure, I couldn't tell you at the beginning what it's going to be like or how it's going to come out. It really is a more responsive kind of thing. I don't know if that even answers the question about the creative process.
Well, it does on both fronts in the way that at least I understand, because I make a lot of geometric artwork, and I just start with one point, in the middle of the page and go from there. And if I have an idea of color, that's about it as far as I'm going to put on it. Structure or, core shapes or anything like that are all secondary to me sitting down and making that first point and then, expanding from the center.
And that's very interesting, because that's what I have told people. The only thing I know about these is they will start in the middle and they will get bigger. They just sort of expand.
And even if you work inward, they get bigger.
They get bigger. You find other kinds of things.
But the piece that stood out to me the most in that particular show was your, I think it was a Batman piece. You had lots of bats and animals and maybe some bugs and the actual bat symbol in it. And I was like, you know what? This guy figured it out. He's like, you got me. I don't know if you figured it out across the board, but you got me, because this is a mandala. It speaks to my geometric art, and then there's Batman on it. Got me.
Well, and the Batman logo, when you turn it upside down, it looks like teeth, vampire fangs,
it does.
And so it makes a good cartoon mouth.
And they were all stamps too. So do you make these stamps?
I don't.
Or are these like found items?
They're found.
Okay.
And again, it may not be true, but I believe that I do not have the collector's gene.
Okay.
Although I will also tell people it's not hoarding if you call it art supplies. So,
I think I've said that myself a few times.
Yes. So, but I don't have the skills or the patience necessarily to hand carve stamps, and I don't have the technology to do sort of engraving, and I don't have a plate maker and emulsions to actually make photographic stamps on rubber and other things. So, I do. Part of my practice is finding stamps.
And that could be all kinds of entertaining.
It is, and I'm snarky enough to think sometimes that I am liberating these stamps from scrapbooking hell and raising them to a higher purpose and all of that.
I'll go with you on that.
And so back when eBay was newer, I wasn't obsessive, but I would check to say, hey, are there any rubber stamps on eBay or Etsy? Or every time when I travel, I always try to find the local scrapbooking or craft store to just see what they have. Or there's a used art supply recycling store, for lack of a better description, in Cincinnati. And when I heard about that, my niece said, so I've got to go dig through the bin of rubber stamps and see what I can find. And so that's part of the fun for me. And then people also ask me how many stamps I have.
And you don't even know, do you?
I don't. And I'm a little afraid to count them because I think the answer might be embarrassing.
Well,
it might be a big number.
Well, you could say it's embarrassing, or you could say you have a large resource of
like
supplies and imagery.
Yes.
So you have a deep well to draw from.
I do. Which then also leads to, because then I treat the stamps as both form or content. So sometimes I look at it and say, well, it's really just a triangle.
Yeah.
And it might be the pyramid with the eyeball from the back of a dollar bill. Sometimes that's just a triangle. I mean, other times it is, it's the icon of the Illuminati or whatever, and I need it for that. So sometimes the bat is, I'm going to think this is a flying thing, so are bugs, and there's some link between flying things, and sometimes I treat them just as shapes.
I mean, it can go both ways. I don't see why not, especially if you're trying to build a larger assembly. You can control your use of positive and negative space with just those forms.
Right.
So yeah. That's so. Do you have a favorite stamp?
Yes and no. It's often a recently acquired stamp, and maybe I'm fickle, but for a while I'll get one, and it'll be like, I'm going to use this everything, everywhere, and then I'll get another stamp, and it's like, oh, you're so last week now that I have a stamp of a crab right now that seems to be appearing pretty frequently because I just got it a couple weeks ago, and the Batman stamp was pretty good. I got this stamp of this weird little kid wearing like a bat Halloween costume that became real popular. I also often I told you I buy things on eBay, but it was rarely on the competitive auctions. Usually just buy it now kind of stamp. But I did win one auction for a Mr. Spock stamp. I sort of learned how long it took before I hit submit, and it sort of went through the internet and posted and got it like with 1 second left on the thing, and this awesome and the thrill of victory also, and the coolness of the stamp elevated Mr. Spock to also one of my favorite stamps.
I think that's worthy of being a favorite stamp, especially if you get that sweet sense of victory to go with it. Yeah,
and I'm enough of a jerk that I like to think that somebody was heartbroken, that whoever I was bidding against,
you beat them.
I won.
That's great. So obviously the geometric stuff is more of the go by feel. How's your workflow for the stuff you plan?
Well, over the long haul, it's either I could say it's changed gradually and significantly over the years, or say it really hasn't changed at all. I've been doing this sort of professionally or semi-professionally for almost 50 years now. Started as a teenager taking painting lessons, and I got really good training in sort of the techniques of traditional realism. The subject matter has changed. But, and some of the approach too. I've always been interested in the techniques of realism, but not necessarily the philosophy. I don't believe that the pictures really have any deep link to reality or anything of that. They're plausible fictions. And maybe that's what changed. Early on, I was sort of straight up, my master's program, I ended up painting a thesis. I was very interested in urban landscape, how slag heaps and construction sites and piles of dirt, and how we build things and then nature very quickly tries to unbuild them, and there's always so the dynamic of things mid-construction being built or mid-destruction being torn down was really interesting, with sort of late afternoon sunlight.
Well, that's a very dynamic scene, or has potential to be.
And I thought it was really interesting, and I sort of thought, as maybe only a young person can, that this is important and was sustainable, and I will spend my life with it. I will paint this theme forever, this grand theme. And forever turns out to usually mean about 3 years for me. So, after a while, I was talking to a dear friend, another painter, and sort of thinking, well, if you're going to be a realist, you're going to use this thing. Nobody's really going to take you seriously if you're not doing the human figure in some way or something. So that's when I sort of got back to, I'm going to do that. And then I sort of honed in on portraiture, but not with the idea of, you go to a big box store and you pose and here's but what else can the face do? And what if people were bright green or, what? And And I got more abstract, I think, in terms of really trying to deal with the illusion of reality in the head, in the artificiality.
Right.
The backgrounds of all the heads I've been painting for years are always dead flat color. Like, I just want to say, okay, here's paint on a surface, like just like you'd paint your wall, and here's this
thing,
theoretically three-dimensional object that
right.
is really flat and so on. And
whatever else.
And whatever else, yeah, and I spend a lot of time, sometimes, as I'm thinking and working at night on these things, I'm sort of figuring out what they mean or might mean as I go along. And even when I'm planning, I'm planning the visual part, but I don't always know about the associations I'm making or other things. So until later, I say, "Oh, yeah, I could tell people this is about."
Yeah, this is the thing now.
Yeah.
So you think through the image you're trying to create, and then you assign meaning or association to it as you're working through it.
Yeah, and assign or find or sometimes, and it's actually interesting. Sometimes I'll have work out on display, and somebody says, "Oh, that's really cool. It reminds me of this." Or I was like,
I never would have thought.
I didn't notice that, or well, I'll give you an example. I didn't realize early on how much Andy Warhol had influenced me, and probably everybody, because everybody of my generation. I mean, he just is part of the visual landscape in a sense.
True.
And somebody pointed out, said the connection. I thought, oh yeah, they're big. They're frontal. They're artificially colored. Of course, they're.
Yeah, right.
But I never said, I would never have said Andy Warhol is one of the big influences on my work. I would have named all kinds of other people that are maybe less obvious, but that was just one moment that comes to mind.
But when this person walked up to the thing and they're like, that's some Andy Warhol looking stuff.
Yeah. You're right.
I mean, that's a compliment in my book. Mm-hmm. As widely received as his body of work is, I'll take that.
Oh yeah, me too. And then on the other hand, it's like, how did I not notice that?
Right. No, it's the fresh eyes.
Yeah.
Which is always good feedback to have.
Absolutely.
I really enjoy when somebody just says, "Hey, man, this is what this makes me think of," and it's so far removed from whatever it is was in my brain or around the thing in context. It's good to be able to have that angle. I normally don't start these conversations with that sort of set of questions, so I just kind of dove into that. But I normally ask, what kind of mediums have you worked with throughout your artistic shenanigans?
A lot. And again, this is the old me sort of reflecting back on how, if I was in charge of things, I would have done things differently. I think, our artistic training gives young artists some very confusing messages sometimes in terms of, consistency and specialization, and you've got to do this one thing and go deep. And there's some value to that. But I'm not sure what training is now, but I was trained in a way that said you should be able to do lots of things with lots of materials and in lots of styles. That if you have a certain skill set, you can do lots of different things. Yeah. So the idea was, if you learn to draw well, you can draw well with pencil or with pen or with Conte or with charcoal or those kinds of things. And the same with painting. So over the years, I've concentrated mostly on painting and drawing and those materials. So all those things I've mentioned, pencil, charcoal, Conte, and ink. I really do have a fondness for ink, and I think the ballpoint pen may well be one of the crowning achievements of the human experience so far.
That's a bold statement.
Yeah, sir. Well, and instrumental surf music is right up there.
Okay.
But
yes.
So, ink, as far as painting, trained as an oil painter and still love oil paint. Learned acrylic when I got a job here, when they said, "Oh yeah, you're going to teach painting," And, oh, no, we can't handle oil paint. We can't handle the fumes and other things. So I was like, oh, well, I will,
I'll figure this out.
And I've said out loud that, well, painting is painting, and paint is just colored grease. If you can paint, you can paint. It doesn't matter if it's
Colored
lipstick or acrylic or whatever. So acrylic has some real advantages. Oil has some real advantages. They're actually, most of my paintings now are laid in with acrylic, and then I switch to oil to finish. So I can go fast at first with the acrylic and then get the sort of the color of oil. I also love pastels, not the cheap chalky things that kids get in high school, but true soft pastels. Although I have a dust allergy, so it's increasingly problematic. I was actually wearing masks long before COVID when I was doing pastel, just because to keep the dust out of my nose. So those are the material, and then the rubber stamp stuff is ink, but it's either printmaking or it isn't, depending on who you ask. But so I use an alcohol-based ink. Okay. I've done very little sculpture. I really like it, but I do assemblage and some basic wood kinds of things, but nothing fancy.
What was your formal artistic education like?
Well, interesting. Like I said, I started as a teenager, and and this is the true story. I was 14 years old. I had a paper route and a bicycle. And I lived in a town. There was a guy who, it was just outside of Akron, Ohio. And there was a guy who just prior to World War II had gone off to Chicago and trained at the American Academy of Art or something, in the sort of golden age of illustration. Got work, did a stint in the Army in the Second World War, came back and thought, well, I can be a small fish in a big pond in Chicago, or I can move back to the Akron area and be a much bigger fish in a much smaller pond. And he was. And he ended up buying an old department store and turning it into sort of a gallery, frame shop, art supply store, studio, gallery. And he offered classes in the evenings. Here's 14-year-old me with a pocket full of paper route money and a bicycle, and I see an ad saying, painting classes starting soon. I said, that sounds like fun. I asked my mother if I could do it, and she's like,
sure.
You got money and I don't have to drive you there? Knock yourself out, kid.
You have that bicycle, you're going to use it.
You're going to use it. So I went and I took a painting lesson, and there were some older guys there, sort of 18, 19, just out of high school, who had been there several years, and to my mind, they were all Leonardo da Vinci and a few Michelangelo. They drew in a way that I thought, the kids I'm looking at in ninth grade, we don't draw like this.
Right.
I want to be like that. And I was hooked. And he was a very generous teacher. He found work for a few, those of us who were sort of young and serious. He was like, well, you can mop floors in exchange for lessons and other things. So I was, I had the paper route and other things. But so I ended up, from the time I was 14 until I was 22, I was at his place pretty much 5 days a week, and learned how to frame and sell art supplies and mop floors and all kinds of other stuff, but took classes continuously through that period. At the same time, in high school, I went through a vocational commercial art program, learned sort of state-of-the-art graphic design techniques from 20 years earlier, and silk screening and layout and typography and those sorts of things. Went to the University of Akron then and thought I was a graphic design major, and I was a graphic design major for the first 3.5 years until meeting my advisor. He said, well, you have about 5 more classes to finish your graphic design degree, but you've taken all these drawing classes as electives. You only need 2 more and you have a degree in drawing. I'm like, well, I guess I'm a drawing major. And so, yes, I graduated with a BFA in drawing. Yes,
simple enough.
I've never seen a want ad saying wanted
drawer.
But so what? Eventually then got an MFA from Kent State in painting, and then finally a PhD in interdisciplinary fine arts. Because I was always, I'm a musician as well. Always been interested in that and the interplay. And because during my MFA, I hooked up with a good friend who was a stagehand who needed help. He had to build a set for an opera director that they were auditioning. He said, I can build anything I want, but I don't know how to show him what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
Could you help me with some conceptual sketches? I go, well, that sounds like fun.
Yeah.
And I did that. And he said, oh, that's kind of cool. Now I got to build it. Do you want to help? And I'm like, that sounds like fun.
Sure,
so I learned a lot about set building. And then he's like, well, you're somewhat reliable and not a complete idiot. So, we sometimes need people to help out on stage with different things. And so sort of by accident fell into that. And the theater is magic. I just really loved it. So long story getting long here, but ended up going to get a PhD that was, as I said, interdisciplinary fine arts that really explored the connections between art, music, theater, philosophy, and those kinds of things. And that's my formal training.
Well, that sounds like a ton of fun.
It was. It's sort of accidental in many ways, but
you wouldn't trade it for.
I wouldn't trade it. It was good training, good experiences. But I guess back to I was trained to be able to. My teacher used to say, if you can draw, you can draw. And then so if people say, I need you to draw, we want this to look in a vaguely Art Nouveau way. It's like, okay, I can do that, or I can do this, and so.
It opens up space to be able to do all sorts of kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
Or whatever you feel you need.
Yeah.
Can we talk about your music for a minute?
Sure.
What instruments do you play?
I'm playing bass mostly now. Originally I played tenor banjo as a kid because how cool is that in the 1970s to play ragtime banjo?
Banjo's cool in my book. I don't care what you're playing.
Yeah, Well, I thought so too. But but then with the group I've been with here for closer to 20 years than more than 15 years. Started out as banjo and played sort of funky percussion. I play the frottoir, which is the Cajun rubboard.
Okay, that's the name for it.
Yes, but also been playing bass now for with this group, Pistol Creek Catch of the Day.
Pistol Creek
Catch of the Day. Yeah.
All right. So what interplays do you find between your artistic practice with visual imagery and your practice with music?
Well, at first I thought, the band sort of started. I wasn't with the original. The three guys put it together. They needed a local talent show fundraiser for some community agencies. They put together an act and said, we need 5 minutes for this talent show. And they're like, that's kind of fun. We should do that. And they kept going. And they were friends with a couple of the guys. And eventually they said, well, you could sit in with us some gigs, or you could fill in on bass if this guy wasn't available or whatever. And it got real popular and real fun. And we all thought, this is cool. And there's this little voice saying, wait a minute, this is taking me away from the studio if I'm not doing that. Until I realized, it's just a different studio. It satisfies the same kind. And when it's good, it's really good. Yeah. And I am not a virtuoso musician by any chance. In fact, I joke, we're a three-piece outfit right now, and I'm the fourth best guitarist in the band. Maybe the third best harmonica player. I don't know, but when it's good, so I am not a soloist. I am not a lead player, and I'm still learning what the role of the bass player is, and learning to play to the song. Not that it's not about my chops or my licks or other things. It's like, what does the song need, and how does this support the singer and or the lead instrumentalist? But what is so satisfying is when we're playing and we're actually listening to each other and it's clicking. It satisfies in all kinds of ways. Yeah. It's the same as when a painting is going well and you get into that sort of flow state and everything's great and time slips away. And
I'm glad you said that, because that flow state, reactionary kind of mindset is one of the things I really like to poke at with people and see if they find it at all, and if they do find it, where and how in their workflow. That interaction with oneself, I think, is a really healthy practice. And I really like trying to find where people find that in their creative process.
Yeah.
So do you find that more with music than you do painting, or does it work both ways?
It works
pretty
both
equal?
ways. I think both ways. I found it in both places. There are times in the painting, and I tell students sometimes, I mean, I tend to use these spectrum or sort of polar opposite kinds of models, not because I think they're real, but they're useful tools to think about how the world is. And so, I talked about planners and proceeders, but also there are starters and there are finishers. And most of the artists I've ever known are starters.
Starters.
Man, we're great at starting stuff. And that's the exciting thing. You've got this problem
and it's
you solve it, and it's new and it's interesting and you don't know. And then once you've solved it, it's just sort of a chore to finish it. And I had to make a rule in my own studio that said I was not allowed to start something new until I finished something existing.
And that was a hard set
That
rule.
was hard, because if not, I would just end up with
all the
half-finished
half-finished.
shit, it's all over the place. And there's techniques too. I learned too that to finishing, one of the tricks is the metaphor for me is you switch the dial and say, okay, I'm no longer developing this, I am finishing it.
Yeah.
And you go into that sort of, I'll finish this part and then the next part and whatever, and you can
compartmentalize and apply logic to this part,
right, and get it done. And that's kind of exciting, but starting is really exciting, and finishing is exciting, and in between is a lot of ditch digging. A lot of, it's just like, I joke, and by joke, I mean I'm in deadly earnest when I tell students that painting is really just a matter of fixing mistakes we made in the first 15 minutes. We rush in, we get okay, and then it's like, oh, well,
So in my day job, I've figured out a lot of the wrong ways to do what I do for a living.
That's useful.
So when people ask me if it's hard or, whatever the question may be about what it is that I do, it's like, I've figured out a really good process of how continually not to screw up until this is done.
Okay.
Yeah. Since I've screwed up every possible way in every way that I could before, I know not to make these mistakes. Let me continue through this process to try and not make those mistakes a second time here now.
Well, that's really interesting, because I think would be a summation of my process. I'm telling myself, don't screw this up. Try to make a good decision. Don't screw this up.
Right.
And I've got to ask, what is your day job?
My day job. All right. So for a living, I just switched into this position, but I'm a print production specialist, I suppose is my title now. But for a living, I wrap cars and make signage and do that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yesterday, I was in Pineville, Kentucky at a school doing perforated window film on a cafeteria. And a few days before that, I was working on a Porsche Cayman GT4. So it spans all the things. I've done box trucks, I've done sports cars, I've done all the things that people could drool over and then sneeze at too. Everything in between.
And I got to ask, and have you used solvents that will dissolve vinyl?
I've used citrus-based solvents to remove adhesives, but not to dissolve vinyl specifically.
Okay, good.
But citrus-based adhesive removers are very prevalent in my workplace.
Yes. Wow.
Rapid Remover is the name of it.
Okay.
If you're curious.
Okay. Well, I just what I told you, I started out as a graphic design major. I worked in a silkscreen sign shop years and years ago, making.
You have to do the silk screens and all that.
Yeah, and point of purchase stuff for department stores, and it was in the pre-citrus-based chemistry era. It was in the.
What were you using?
We were using methyl ethyl ketone.
Oh,
and
I'm familiar with that.
Our biggest concession to health and safety was we switched to unleaded gasoline to clean the screens with.
Yeah. Well, that's progress.
It was progress, and lacquer thinner, and it was. Yeah, it's. I figured out very early that this was probably not something I wanted to do for decades and decades, because
I've used methyl ethyl ketone before, not in this workplace,
Yes.
but I have used it in some other contexts. That's a funny chemical right there.
It's nasty. Yeah.
So what? How do music and art play? Does one inspire the other for you, or do they have their own separate avenues of expression? Do they mingle a lot? I guess is my question.
Yeah. Well. And for folks out there, this is me staring off into space, looking puzzled as I'm contemplating this great question, scratching my chin, and going, I could answer that as in both ways. I could say that they're incredibly similar in a lot of ways, and I in terms of what they do and how they do it. At the same time, they're also, it's easy for me to keep them separated. On the one hand, for me, the idea of being on a road and trying to get better at how I do things has always been important. And a lot of artists, and I'm a little, I guess I run against the grain. Historically, a lot of artists, especially realist painters, have been tighter earlier in their careers and they get looser as they go. And that's a kind of virtuosity. I'm just the opposite. I'm actually still getting tighter and tighter in terms of the specific detail that I'm trying to get. And the same with music. I want to get better at playing,
right?
Whatever that means. And sometimes better isn't always more. It isn't always faster or other things. So in that sense, there's a lot of similarity in just trying to think about craft and getting better at it. On the other hand, there's I think about sort of, painting is a fundamentally private kind of thing.
Most people do that at home or in
alone.
the studio.
I love having people to my studio to talk about stuff, but not while I'm working.
That's just where you draw.
That just don't. I mean, it's like, no, you can't. Or you can be here, but I'm not going to be working. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's because there's all kinds of ways to get it. But also, I'm an entertainer in the sense that I like being on stage. I don't need to be the front man or anything, but I do like I tell jokes when the band is tuning, or if they break a string or whatever. I'm the one who's like, we don't want dead air, so here's a really horrible dad joke, folks, or whatever. And so that's very different with the art. I'm making it with people in mind, and I want to see them, and I want to hear what they say, but it's a different kind.
But only after the fact.
Only after the fact. I don't want to, nobody gets to see that sausage being made. Being a musician, that's all you do. If you're up on stage, I mean, that's sausage making.
The show is the show.
The show is the show, and it's and I hope it doesn't suck, and it's. So I don't know if that's really answering the question, but those are some of the ways I think about it.
Okay. Do you take that mentality into the classroom? Do you teach?
I do
in that manner.
I try to. I try to. There's a few things I've learned about teaching. One is that we tend to teach as we were taught, both positive and negative. Yeah. I channel my best teachers and try to avoid my worst teachers. Yeah. That sort of, I don't want to be that guy.
Because I feel it as if anybody who has went through any form of formal education like that has really good examples of great teachers and bad teachers.
Yes, yeah. And there's actually some of my teachers, I still hear them in my head in my studio at night. I hear the problem, and I'm like, I'll hear a problem, and I'll hear one of my teachers sort of say, well, have you thought about this, or do that? Or even it's like, that's what he was talking about. Yeah. I didn't know what that meant 40 years ago, but
it clicked right.
But it clicked now. Yeah. I also know that enthusiasm and genuineness are really important. That students know if you're faking it.
Yeah. it takes less than 3 minutes to figure it out.
Oh yeah, and and I even tell people the purpose of an education, especially at a place like that, liberal arts college, is to make sure your crap detector is in fine tune and in good working order. And and if I'm spouting crap, they'll know it and they'll take it. So I try to be honest. I try to be, but I'm really enthusiastic. The students over the years said I get excited about everything.
Well, that's good. It shows that you care.
And also, one of the real benefits of teaching is you learn more by being a teacher than you might as a student. And that, especially when you get to the upper levels and students are doing their own things, it's so exciting to help them sort of say, wow, that's really cool. Have you thought about this? What about this? Oh, here's a thing you could look at. And
well, in your position, you have a lens to both sides of this coin.
Yeah.
Because, you as the instructor get to see the format of the thing, and then the students get to be experiencing the format of the thing, and you can look at both of them interacting with each other at the same time.
Yeah.
My mom was an English and language arts teacher for like 30 years. Seeing people be teachers is something I'm very familiar with. So talking to teachers and coaches is something I enjoy as well. Cool. So some other kind of folds into the thing that I like to explore.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you said coaches too, because I think that's a model that's also in the background that, I'm less. I mean, sometimes I guess I'm supposed to be the dispenser of knowledge, and in an introductory level art history class, there are just certain facts, and the facts are the facts, and you do that. But coaching is a different idea, and a lot of teaching painting is an interesting thing because there are certain fundamental skills and ideas or techniques that I can show people, and there's. When I really stop and think about it, you're always making decisions about, okay, I'm watching this student attempting to do this thing, and I know how to be efficient, and I could save them 6 months of struggle by just saying, try it like this, do it like that. But at the same time, you're like, how much is it valuable to say, you need to just go through this and figure it out and learn by doing and do some trial and error. So you're always, hoping again. And it's the same as studio. You're like, don't screw this up. Try to.
Well, and then once I go through that struggle, you can present them to that idea and be like, hey, I'm glad you did this. Now you know this.
Right.
Or now you can think of it like this.
And on the other hand, you also are telling ideas and I know from my own experience that they might not be ready for this. It might not be relevant for them, but the seed is still there. It may blossom 10 years later. It may never. So what? And so teaching is, I never set out to be a teacher, but on the other hand, too, my teachers, and a couple in particular, made it very clear that there was an obligation that to pass on certain kinds of craft traditions. And I got such good teaching that it really is a privilege to be able to say, I know some things, and I hope you all want to know them too.
Well, would it be a disservice if you didn't in some way distribute that information?
Well, in their view, they certainly would have said, that would be sort of wrong or selfish. So, like I say, I didn't set out to be a teacher, and yet I do feel some sense of obligation and gratitude for the teaching that I received. And it has solved the quandary of how am I going to eat?
Right. So how did you fall into the teaching gig? Like, did you get your certificate to be a teacher in some way?
No, I'm not certified to work in the public schools or anything. I can only.
So you just were approached and took the opportunity.
Yeah, no, I wasn't. Yes, I was. When I told you I went off to get the doctorate in interdisciplinary fine arts, teaching came with that. They were like, "You're okay. You'll teach one class a semester and actually get some training in how to teach." Okay. There's all the graduate students we met once a week to sort of talk about issues and ideas and so on. And so I taught for 3 years while I was at Texas Tech as a graduate student. Coming out, I thought I was going to be a curator. That I thought, oh yeah, living in a museum basement, out of the sunshine,
all the things that nobody gets to see.
That's what I'm going to do. And so I applied for lots of different, like lots of graduate students. I sent my resume to lots of places, and was offered a curatorship in North Dakota, and was offered a teaching job at some little school I never heard of, nestled in the foothills of the Smokies, and thought, okay. Interviewed for both and was offered both jobs. And I like telling the story. My wife, I called her and talked about this great job in Fargo, and she said, "Oh, honey, that's great. I love you, and I'll miss you."
And a soft goodbye.
and she was absolutely right. This has been the good choice, but it was that sort of, okay, well, I got some options, and the sort of was, well, if that doesn't work out, we'll do something else.
So if you were going to Fargo, you were going by yourself.
Yep. And it worked out. It's been great. I thought, we'll go, we'll teach, see how it goes. And how do I say that? I've been relatively successful as a teacher. I think, it's that whole idea of, try not to screw this up. I think I pretty much haven't. I haven't been called in the offices. Nobody's ever said, "What the hell are you doing?"
Right.
So.
And I would imagine you've not, too terribly crushed anybody's creative drive.
Yeah. Well, that's that's interesting that you said that too. There are.
I can imagine it'd be difficult to chauffeur people with the knowledge that you have all the time.
Yeah, and there, when students come in a wide variety of attitudes and abilities and so on. And this is my favorite bad dad joke. I always wake up, or I work into every class some way of saying, there are two kinds of people in the world. People who divide the world into two kinds of people who don't, and people who can't count very well. But there are two kinds of teachers, I think, or two models. And in grad school, somebody said, there's the one model that's sort of the city dog pound. Let's get 30 students, lock them in a cage for a month, and after 30 days, throw in a bone and see who really wants it. And really competitive. The other is one that says, let's accept a few students and nurture the crap out of them and make sure they succeed. And so I always want to be in that first camp. And that competitive, hard-ass, thicken your hide and fight for kinds of stuff is useful for some kinds of student, and you need to be in certain kinds of things. But as a teacher, I don't want to crush souls. I would be mortified if I thought a student was crushed by something I said or whatever. So I appreciate you sort of leading this conversation there, because I very much want to be the kind of, and I got this from a mentor who was here when I first got here. He was a classical piano teacher, but he used to say, "Hi, my name's Robert. How can I help?" And so in upper level painting, when I use that same sort of model, say, "Hi, I'm Carl. What are you working on, and how can I help?"
Right.
So
a lot of the good example of teachers that I've had experience with, throughout my levels of education, they have always been the ones that were gently encouraging whatever expression needed to happen for the curriculum I was working on. Right. So I appreciate that that's your point of view, because those are the pleasant memories I have about my form of education. So I'm happy to see that you echo those sentiments. Yeah,
me too. I think, that's been my experience. And then, again, one of the teachers whose voice I still hear, though, he had this great, I always called it sort of a Zen dialectic. He was so gentle and so helpful and so encouraging, while always asking me why I wasn't doing exactly the opposite of what I was doing.
He was all about it.
He was all about this is really good, but it's so small. Have you tried big, man? People would really notice if you. And so I'd come back a week later with these big things. He'd yeah, that's great. Small is intimate. It was always just, and what he was doing was he was just really gently pushing to say, consider that consider the other side. Consider the different and
the gentle devil advocate play.
Yeah.
Like,
and another really foundational teacher, in hindsight, sort of did the same thing. He took us for what he called the graduation speech. It was a private summer painting program in Connecticut.
that's cool.
But he said, we painted all day long, and he came in 2 days a week. He had retired from the Art Students League in New York, and a pretty prominent painter. But he used to tell students, he said, a teacher can only teach you what they know.
Yeah.
And they can only do what they can do. If you're fighting and resisting the teacher, you're an idiot. He said, you're wasting your time and your money.
Yeah.
He said, as a student, you're sort of the best course is do what the teacher asks you to do to the best of your ability, and so on. And then when you're done, throw it all away. Then, he said, you're honor bound to reject all of it.
Yeah.
And
then it's your turn.
And then do it exactly the opposite. And then he said you'll reclaim what was useful, what was important, and you will leave behind what wasn't. And of course, in the heat of the moment, you're like, well, whatever.
Sure, man.
Yeah, exactly. But in hindsight, it's like, that's absolutely right.
I guess he's had a window of time long enough to look back and realize this, from his own experience.
Yeah. And so you do. There are things that I was taught that just didn't make any sense for me. And, I've let those things go. But, it might be self-serving for a teacher to tell people, fighting with the teacher is a bad idea. Well, yeah.
Well, I mean, in the hierarchy of the arrangement like that, like, there's a teacher, there's a student. Their job is to teach. Your job is to go through the curriculum and try to learn things.
Yeah.
So it's the agreed upon arrangement of things.
Yeah.
By being in the classroom.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
If you're doing anything less than that,
he was talking too. I mean, it was like if you want to be a jazz pianist, but you're studying with a classical one, you're like, you'd be an idiot to argue with the classical pianist, say, but I want jazz.
Right.
It's like
the overlap there is very.
It's like, no, this is not what I do.
Right.
So
I can't teach you jazz. I'm a classical pianist. Since you touched a little earlier about inspirational artists, can you name a few of those and/or why they're somewhat inspirational to you?
Oh, wow. And this changes all the time. Charles Birchfield is one that I just absolutely love. And he's not a household name, certainly, but he was a watercolorist who had this idiosyncratic but intense relationship with nature. He would just go out and he would paint the sound of thunderstorms in the woods. He would paint the coming of spring as if it was a visible force,
as
like
if it just
fire that was just marching through the winter woods. He went through several paintings. So his work, I really, really like it. I've always liked Edward Hopper, that golden hour, which I call Hopper time, that last 15 minutes,
right before sunset.
Right before sunset. And in many ways, I think he was an inspiration because he might be the patron saint of mediocre technicians. He did not have the virtuoso technique that, I love people like John Singer Sargent or Velázquez who, flick, flick, flick. Oh, here's the king with the lace and all this. And you're like, how did you do that? Hopper is much more like plodding. He's like, okay, this is not particularly elegant brushwork or other, but the paintings are all the more powerful because they at least give the illusion that anybody could do that. But
do you think that makes an image more accessible?
Well, yes, or at least it's something that's just like, wow, it's the strength of the vision. We used to argue in painting school sometimes, and I get, not so much argue, but the idea, I've always said, amazing technique cannot rescue a mediocre idea, but a great idea can be supported by mediocre technique. So you got to, and Hopper is the proof of that. His vision is so amazing. The technique is adequate to this amazing thing.
But it clearly gets the point across.
It clearly gets the point across. But all the showy technique in the world, if your idea is mediocre, all you got is mediocre at the end of
Right.
the day. So he's always been important. There are other people I know. I think artists like Judy Baca is kind of a hero too. She got gangs in L.A. to paint the Great Wall of Los Angeles, this mural in this old sewer ditch that's supposedly the biggest mural in the world. It's like 1.5 miles long.
All right.
And I heard her talk on video tape one time about as an artist, she's not there to come into a community and say, this is what you want, or this is what you need, or this is what I'm going to do. She comes in and says, tell me your story. What's up? And she listens to people and that kind of bottom up model is real important. And so those are some that come to mind right now.
But if I were to ask in 10 minutes, I might get a different list.
You might get more. And I'd be like, oh yeah, what about this? You know. I got to go see. I've seen Laurie Anderson as a performer. Oh, I'm wearing my Laurie Anderson T-shirt today, so of course she's been.
It's a well-worn T-shirt.
It is well worn. I knew her as a performance artist and have seen her a couple times, but then was in D.C. last year. There was a big retrospective at the Hirshhorn, and again, it just reminds me she's just really somebody who is just really thoughtful and interesting and uses words and sounds and images and space and puts people in a way that she just really gets the thoughts rolling around in my head. And so she'd be one that would make my list of really inspirational kinds of things.
Do you are there any aspects of their work that you try to fold into yours in some that's loose phrasing for that question, but you know what I'm trying to say.
And all of those would be at some point or another I've tried to with Hopper, for example. I mean, and Hopper, certainly I was looking a lot when I was doing my master's thesis. I read at one point where he said he went out on location and did lots of sketches and lots of watercolors and lots of notes, but he always went back and did the paintings in the studio because he said reality was too messy. It was like there are fire hydrants and electric lines, he said, that are just busy noise. He said you go back in the studio and you sort of edit out the inessentials.
Yeah.
And so I sort of thought, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You can improve on your actual visual experience and those kinds of things. With Laurie Anderson, it's just like, she's open-ended in some ways. You don't have to beat people over the head with this is what the message is.
Right.
You just say, here's some questions. Here's some bits and pieces, and there's lots of ways to connect them. Have fun.
But she just presents them.
She just presents it in a way.
These are the things.
Yeah, she's not telling me, and it's something I tell Susan. I mean, if you want me to think about something, I would much rather that you whisper something suggestive in my ear rather than hit me between the eyes with a 2x4.
Right.
So that's something I think I would get from her work or others.
I think that's a very useful ethos to have about it, because a lot of people don't like just having ideas shoved down their throat.
Oh yeah, in fact, I think very few people like having anything shoved down their throat.
Right.
So,
I mean, there's something to be said for being blatant, in the message, whatever it may be. But if you can be blatant gently, I think that's a more effective delivery for whatever information you're trying to present. I've been trying to develop that idea in my work lately, because normally I work really abstract. I do geometric stuff, really bright colors, all that. And there's a piece a body of work I'm trying to get together right now that is far more blunt in its presentation of these ideas, but not so blunt that you're like, oh geez, this guy's really got a problem with that, if I can just gently put these ideas out there in a somewhat crass but realistic manner, to show that I am genuinely concerned or involved with the things I'm doing, try not to be too upfront about it, but at the same time, put it out there that this is the thing I need you to think about.
Yeah. And I really need to see this now that you're telling me about this.
I will show you. Okay. They won't be on display until they're finished and up in August, but I'll show you the progress I have in my gallery on my phone.
Okay, cool.
So you talked about one of the first things you said when I turned this on was not all my ideas are my own, but some sentiment to that. Mm-hmm. One of the things another thing I really enjoy asking people is how much or how many of their ideas do they feel like they generate themselves versus ideas that come to them in some way where they feel as if they're a conduit to that idea. Because I'm in both camps really hard.
Yeah, me too. And my students will tell you that I can argue with myself from the beginning of a sentence to the end of this. But from the beginning of the sentence by the end, I've completely reversed my position. And part of that is deliberate. I try and say, well,
if you play devil's advocate with yourself, that's a healthy discourse.
It is. And I could certainly say that no ideas are new, and everything that can be thunk has been thought. Thunk is a better way to say it. Better sound effect. Yeah. Anything that can be thought has been, and so what? And also I know as a historian that our sort of obsession with originality and newness for the sake of newness is a particularly current thing, and most of the world has not cared about. You don't make religious paintings. You don't paint them blue just because you want to paint them blue. You make them work the way they've always worked, and all that. And yet, certainly a lot of times it feels like ideas, and certainly ideas are new to me and do that. But again, I'm increasingly aware of how much artists are really just conduits for reassembling and collaging ideas and other things. And I used to tell students, and it was, this is probably pretty dated now that people, get their coffee from coffee shops or Keurigs, but I used to say, the whole goal of being an artist, the model I'm using is you want to be a sophisticated coffee maker. You want to fill your head with beans, grind them as finely as possible, and see what drips out later. And in this metaphor, the beans are read better books, see more movies, go places, talk to people who are interesting, watch the news, stick stuff in your head, because if art is really thinking, and I really think it is, you're making images and things, but it's about ideas.
It's the process of the idea, more or less. So.
And so, and as a teacher and in college, we can teach you how to think better, not what to think or what to think, but we can give you certain tools that say, oh, well, you can use, you can reduce an idea to its absurd conclusion or other kinds of, but you have to have things to think about. Not having just the technique.
And you have to get those
and you have to get those. And so in that sense, I very much, I read all the time. I love watching movies. I love traveling. I love and I just stick stuff in there and grind. And eventually.
The grind is the unconscious part.
Often. It's
because I don't know how many times I've been thinking about something really hard and then the idea just come to me. As much as you can try to come up with whatever it is, like the 10 minutes after that when you're like taking a piss or whatever, it's like when it
and that's when you better have the notebook done, right? Because you don't want to be later go, man, I had this great idea. Trust me, it was really good, but I have no idea what it was.
The notepad in my phone is filled with stuff like that because that's generally the thing I have closest at hand. And as you pull your little field notes book out of your pocket,
book out of my, and it's
graph paper, not lined paper.
Well, some is lined, some is blank. I get all kinds. So currently it's graph paper, but it has addresses. It has books that people told me about. I said that sounds interesting. It has ideas. It was
it's the general purpose repository for all the ideas.
One thing I found interesting though is that. I have an idea. I'm like, oh, this is really cool. And then maybe I'll be looking at sketchbooks from 30 years ago and go, wait, I had that thought 30 years ago.
I've done this already.
Or I was interested in that same thing, and it sort of,
Right. It could fall both ways.
Yeah.
Usually when I look back at my old stuff, I'm like, man, I was thinking that. So back when, I think I could do it better now.
Oh yeah. I would hope. I am not of the camp that you should save everything you've ever done, and it's not a sacred object just because you touched it or whatever.
Right.
But hopefully you feel proud of the things you've done and are still committed and still believe in them. At the same time, a little bit of healthy embarrassment about the stuff you did years ago is a real sign of growth. You're saying,
so
I wouldn't do that.
Let's do this. I'll spill some beans about stuff I drew when I just started being a creative person. So in middle school and high school, I grew up in a really conservative Christian town, small East Tennessee, 2 stoplights, stereotype, blah, blah, blah. I was of the sort to rebel against everything holy in this place because what else does one do as an angsty teenager?
Right.
And I was drawing a lot of skulls and flames and upside down crosses and all the things that would piss off the old people. And I still have like 2 3-ring binders of those full, and I keep them at the bottom of my entertainment center. So whenever I'm just like, what would a real like emotionally turbulent Thomas be drawing right now? I'll go back and I'll look at those. And, there's some wholesome stuff in there. Like I've got some landscape sketches and some portraiture and whatnot, but that is a much rarer part of that catalog of my work than that context is now. So I've kind of switched ratios with the work because sometimes I still really want to draw and paint stuff that pisses people off. And that's fun for me.
And that is one of the important functions of art through the ages has been to...
there's a quote, I don't know who did it, but it says the role of an artist is to be a mirror for society. And I think about that a lot when I'm doing my more emotionally invested or socio-politically contextual stuff. And like that breeds the questions of what is the truest form of this idea I'm trying to express? What is the most straightforward or genuine way to express that idea? Do I use words? Do I use pictures? Do I use both? Like what symbolism do I want to employ? The whole breakdown of that starts from that question, like how to best employ this idea to someone's eyes. And that is a question that I've posed to myself more frequently as I get older and into my creative practice, that I'm grateful that I discovered in the first place. But I know for a fact if I wasn't trying to piss people off just out of pure spite when I was 16, that progress of logic would not have been the same.
That is so interesting, and it sounds just so right on, without sounding too much like a child of the 60s.
Well, it works. It works for me, and I was certainly not the most regular outcome of this society that I grew up in. I'll never not say that I was a black sheep or, just not the regular person you would find in Sneeville, Tennessee. So I never had a problem being a little bit weird. And that little bit weird has done me well, at least so far.
But what's so cool for me in hearing this is you've really discovered, I think, the heart of how to be an artist, at least as I would see it, because you're starting with the idea, and whether the idea was I'm going to piss off the powers that be, and you're asking yourself every decision: does this serve my idea or not?
And it's
like, do I use words or do I use pictures? That's a really sophisticated way of saying, words would do this and be received this way, images this, which is more appropriate. That's the skill I'm really hoping my students have, that sort of, you got to be your own harshest critic and be sort of real forthright and honest in, does this serve the idea or not? And if it doesn't, what would be a better decision that serves my idea? And
to draw a parallel in this conversation alone, how you view playing bass, what can I do for the song? What can I do for this idea, for this image? Is the same thought, but with a different lens, with a different context. One of the things that I absolutely love about having these conversations with people like yourself is that I get to discover how many different lenses there are on the same topic. You obviously have 1,000 different lenses. I have 1,000 different lenses. Which ones do we have that are similar enough that we can draw parallels between? Which ones aren't? And how are they different? And why are they different? What logic makes this a separate lens from the other thing? And I enjoy lateral thinking and creative thought and just the general mental gymnastics that come with a creative practice, whether it be yoga or painting or, being an author. Like, I feel as if being a creative person is the same. And, it's like a tree. It just branches out into whatever avenue, context, workflow, medium, outlet you choose. And if you're articulate enough about the thing that you choose to spend energy on, you can have conversations like this where you express the finer details about whatever the thing is. And I just love talking to people and finding that out, because I can talk about and think about my stuff all day, but I want to know about everybody's different stuff. So I have to ask them the same questions that I've been asking myself and talk about it in the same manner, because I really want to understand how you work about your work. So I know how I deal with my work. So I want to find the similarities and differences in other people's lives and creative efforts. And God, it's just so much fun.
And this is real fun for me too.
I haven't asked this question to anybody before because it came up to me at the top of this conversation. Do you ever talk about your creative process, like in class or with your significant other or anything? Like, do you?
Oh, I'm sure I have, and I'm sure I do, but probably not I don't sit down and say, let's talk about my creative process. So I'm going to tell you, this kind of organic.
This interaction is a more like framework. Hey, let's talk about stuff kind of thing. But I feel like everybody has that outside of this, in an informal context where they're bouncing ideas off somebody. You're like, hey, I do this way. And some people do that more than others.
Yeah, and I have a couple of artistic confidants, and my significant other, my wife, is one who I'll just be either, hey, come see what I did last night or whatever, and she's got a really good eye and some other kinds of things. And I'll talk with my family about sort of what I'm thinking about or what about this, and get some initial sort of high-quality feedback.
Right.
I also have a dear friend from the painting school that I started when I was 14, a guy who, probably the closest thing to a child prodigy I've ever seen, one of the most talented artists. And talent, by this means, is hardworking. Talent is overrated. I mean, he outworked everybody in terms of learning how to do this. But I see him a couple times a year, and we
have conversations.
And he will speak truth to me. He'll be like, "This is not your best work."
It's good to have that.
Yeah, it's absolutely essential. We said you have to be your own harshest critic, and you have to be honest with yourself. But it also helps to have somebody whose work or whose opinion really matters, and whose judgment I value. To say this, and he has told me that I serve the same function for him. I mean, that we will talk about, what we see and how we see it. And so that's important. As far as talking about the creative process in class, I think I do, but just in the context of how, and some of it is intentional. I do a workshop with introductory drawing students, so sort of ask them, say, how many of you think you're creative? And it always surprises me, the different responses. Some people are like, I'm not creative at all.
Right.
And I'm like,
do you remember what you dreamed last night? Because your brain did that.
Yeah, and what does it mean, and so on. But then I give them an exercise where they have to come up with a list of at least 100 uses for a brick that have nothing to do with construction or architecture or these kinds of things. But then I say, set a little part of all that bright, shiny brain power you have, sit on your own shoulder and watch yourself solve this problem.
Yeah.
And we go through it. And I say, just all I ask is that you come up with at least 100 uses and write them down in the order that you come up with them. And then, so they have the weekend or so to do that.
And that's a really loosely organized task, too.
Oh, yeah.
So it could be however it comes to you, whenever it comes to you, as long as you end up with this, you're good. And
then we talk about it, and I say, so, okay, if, how many did you come up with? And sometimes people are like, well, I stopped at 180. I'm like, cool. Other people are like, I'm at 42. I'm like, okay. How many of you wrote down, let's read your first 10 things, and you have, message delivery system for wrapping up through here, nutcracker, food smasher, weapon.
Right.
I'm saying, if you don't have those really obvious low-hanging fruit kinds of ideas as your first 10, I want to talk to you because your mind does not work like everybody else's.
Right.
If you don't have food smasher or window breaker or weapon in there,
like if weapon isn't near the top of the list, then it's blaringly obvious.
That's really interesting. Then I said, how many of you have a break somewhere where you got the 15 or so, and then you stopped and then started saying, well, this is stupid. Why are we doing this? And they're like, oh, yeah. And then say, so then what did you do to generate more ideas? How did you, I'll be like, how many of you Googled uses for a brick? And half were like, I did, but I thought it was cheating. I'm like, who said it was cheating? And so we have this long conversation.
There's no rules in a street fight.
Exactly. Did I say Google it or not?
Right.
And then, so we talk about imposing limitations that don't really exist and all this and that, and techniques for, once you start to think about the color of a brick, how could that generate ideas? What about the shape? What about the weight? What about
the separate physical
Uncle
aspects
Google,
of the thing?
the Uncle Google effect, where how many of you asked your roommates?
Hey, what would you use a brick for?
Exactly. And so, but the whole idea is it's about generating ideas and creativity. But I also treat it sometimes as, ideas are a dime a dozen. Having ideas you can get good at.
Yeah, like generating and analyzing the ideas is
the next
the
level skill. It's like, how do you tell the good ones from the bad ones and the new ones? But I'm off topic. Whether or not I have new ideas, I don't know. But I think the skill is, where can you get them?
Right.
What can you do with them? In my art history classes, especially in the 20s, in some senses, all art is about other art.
It's all appropriated.
It's all appropriate, or it's all commenting, or it's in the tradition of, or it's rejecting and arguing. But it's, just like, in some senses, music is about music.
There's. I don't feel as if you can easily separate the experience that generates the idea when it comes to these things, because without the experience, you wouldn't have the genesis of the idea. And the experience is, in most people's life, a lot of place where I draw my general ideas from is just like daily life, because I'm out here living, doing the thing, participating in society and whatnot. So, that enters my brain, and then it gets distilled into whatever image my brain decides to smack me with, because it's never like a gentle administering of an idea to myself. It's just like, hey, here's this. So it's oh God, what do I do with it? And then I let it sit in my brain for however amount of time until it
drips out later.
Till it's done, or till I can't stand it bugging me any longer. And then I have to do something about it. Whether that's write it down and sketch it, be like, I need to draw this, but I'm going to list the elements of the thing that I need to convey. Right. Just so I have something on paper, some degree of it's outside of my brain now.
I'd ask you, actually, how much do you go look at some, because I go to every museum I can find and every gallery, and I just need...
I try to hit First Friday stuff as often as possible. I'll go to the McClung Museum on UT campus, I don't know, once a quarter if they've got something cool rolling through. Sometimes I'll go just to look if I've seen the exhibit before. Anytime I'm in DC, I hit all the Smithsonians and everything. I love DC. Since you mentioned DC, I've spent a lot of time there. Saw the Hope Diamond in the Natural History Museum. That was really cool. I love the Air and Space Museum. The Air and Space Museum is where I spend most of my time if I'm doing that kind of thing in DC. I love machines and airplanes and space and all that jazz like that. Contextually, in my artwork, that is something I visually represent a lot, but it's also a huge area of inspiration for me, just because there's so much shit we don't know about space and the outer and the other. All the positive aspects of that idea funnel into my work in some form or fashion. But also seeing how people do things is really cool. So seeing all the different ways that a man has figured out how to move through space, literally, metaphorically, experimentally, all that is really inspiring to me. And at a technical level, like, these are machines that do a task that were engineered by a person. What's the thought process that ended up with this machine that does this specific task? So being exposed to that kind of logic and having it on display for my consumption is really nice, to just like kick my brain in the pants and think about stuff. I also try to spend a moderate amount of time outdoors. Like I don't shy away from my love of nature in any form or fashion. So I'm going to try and go camp tonight and watch the meteor shower. So
cool.
Like that's how I'm going to enjoy the outdoors tonight. And the Lyrid meteor shower is a pretty good one if you have the patience to watch it. I very much enjoy it. I try to watch as many meteor showers and all the astronomical stuff. I try to be involved in that as much as I can. And then just somehow through these experiences, my ideas find their way to my fingertips, and then I let them out into the world again as art or poetry or whatever. It's all the same expression. It's just out of me now.
Right.
But if I didn't seek those experiences, I wouldn't have the experiences I needed to put on the paper, so to speak. And I'm really happy there's a multitude of available things to get that. I just don't think I would be creating the same things if I didn't live the life I was living, because there's no way I can create the things I'm making without the experiences that make me me.
Right.
And I will never back away from that idea. I'll die on that hill.
Yeah. Well, that makes perfect sense to me. I don't think there's any other way to be creative. I mean, you have to have the raw material, for lack of a better term.
So when you are confronted with an idea that isn't yours, as like you present yourself an idea, like all of a sudden your brain's just like, hey, this. But do you have any idea where you think those come from, or is that just a thing that happens to you and you don't really think about it a whole lot, or?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, like sometimes will point things out. Sometimes I'll be like, oh yeah. Sometimes it seems real obvious to me that we were watching this thing and then I'm dreaming about that thing or whatever it seems, or and sort of big ideas keep coming. But again, I just try and. I guess I'm more concerned with just keeping up with them rather than figuring out their provenance or whatever.
Yeah, like, sometimes they come at a rate of speed that it's just more than anyone can handle. And I will tell people, that multitasking is bad on principle. I mean, try and be in the moment, do the thing that you're doing and do it the best you can. At the same time, I'm like, okay, well, I've got to write that down, but somebody's trying to do this over here, and it's just like... That's just when you reach for the notebook, write it down real quick.
Right. Somebody's emailing you and something else is happening. So just keeping up is a full-time kind of thing. And there are two kinds of people. While I try to do that, I think, is it up where the dog is easily distracted by squirrels? The world is full of squirrels.
Yes,
and
the world is full of squirrels.
And you're like, you want to notice them, but not chase every one of them, because. So that's something again. Yeah, a lot of times I'm just like, the act of working on one thing. In many ways, maybe what I'm trying to say is it seems to be a source of other ideas, because you're like, well, that's a cool color combination. I should pay attention for something else, or this is,
Well, a lot of ideas hit me when I'm not thinking, because I'm working on something. Whatever that thing may be, idea will pop in my head about something else I want to make, or something else I'm in process with, and then just be like, oh shit, well, what do I do with this information? I better write this down, or like draw a picture or something. Like a lot of the jewelry that I make, which I don't make a lot, but I make the things that I want to see. So anytime I have like a shape or a theme that comes across my brain, I will like sketch it out. I really like the classic great wave painting. So I was looking at it one night, and I don't have a poster or painting or print or anything of it in my house, but that's one of those images that lives rent free in my head, and it inspired a piece of jewelry. And then I drew it out, and it was a semicircle with cresting. 3 beams that are cresting up out of the center, but the proportions and the shape of it were generally inspired by that great wave painting, and that is a thing that I've experienced, and it has sat in my brain and distilled itself down into this image, which represents this 3D shape, which I then put in the computer and ran on my 3D printer, and then sanded and stained, and then assembled around the jewelry, and then just that chain of action following the single idea that initially came when I was totally in the middle of something totally unrelated, but you never really know what's kicking around in the back of your head,
right?
And then all of a sudden you're in the middle of something and like it clicks, and you're like, well, there it is.
There it is. And but you were there to pay attention and notice it and follow through. So
I try not to fixate on how these things come to me because I'm just happy that they do.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I think that's what I meant when I did it. I was just trying to keep up with them. Just saying, yep, I'm glad they're there. Maybe a conclusion to that is I'm not ever worried about creative block or those kinds of things. And I figure I got a backlog of stuff, that is just like,
But I don't ever feel that either. Yeah. Like, obviously, I know what it's like to feel stumped on a project.
Oh, yeah,
but never like I'll never have another idea again because thousands of them go through your head every day. Right. I don't feel obligated to snatch every one of them. I don't feel as if somehow somebody turned the well off. Never felt that way.
And being stumped is good because, again, I love talking to students. That's a really healthy model. A lot of artists work say, well, here's a technical problem that I can challenge. Or students will often say, well, how would it be if I did this? And I said, well, or what will happen if I do this? I'm like, we'll know in about 10 minutes, or whatever. It's like, I got no idea. I've never done that. But it's probably not fatal or explosive, so let's try it.
Yeah, let's try it. I don't think you're going to die.
There's some ideas that you're like, I just don't think that's a good idea.
We should just pour naphtha all over it and then hit it with a blowtorch. That sounds like exactly the way to finish this meeting.
I'd shut that one down. But a lot and students sometimes seem surprised when I'm like, I got no idea. Let's try it.
Right.
We'll know whether this works after we do it. You'll know what it looks like after it exists,
because now it's here.
But we don't know. So, in that sense, it's really good to say, oh, okay, or could these materials work together? Or what if I put a base layer down and scrape it up? All those kinds of things are motivating challenges. Yeah. And sometimes, though, I think maybe it's a hard lesson for some folks, and maybe it was for me too, is that maybe some things stump you, and you remain stumped.
Yeah.
You're like, I've got paintings that I never resolved that it's just like,
leaned up in the corner somewhere.
I'm just not going to do this. This is never going to be good, no matter what.
Right.
And that's okay,
But lessons learned and applied to literally everything else after that.
Yeah. And you just hope that the frequency or number of those things doesn't increase.
Goes down.
or whatever. But
all right, so it is 10:45 right now. We've got 15 minutes until class starts. Right, we've been sitting here for an hour and 27 minutes.
Wow. Time goes by when you're having fun. This has been very fun.
Can I ask you to describe the room we're in? Because we're in your studio at Maryville College, correct?
Well,
this is your classroom.
This is the painting studio, and what we're seeing here is actually a lot of student work from my colleague, Doug Kimball, who also teaches here. He's doing the intro. But I use this space sometimes, too. I started this new thing yesterday, and there's a place here. It is a big white box.
It is.
It's cool. One of the things we insisted, my studio is 500 yards away here. I live very close to my day job, and it's awesome. Oddly enough, for a painting studio, there are no windows in this room. But
you have this giant window just outside the door.
We have a giant window outside the door, which is good for daylight and so on. But the lights here, the fluorescent lights, are not the fluorescent lights of your father's basement. These are daylight balanced, 5,200 degree Kelvin.
So this is a very specific light.
So this is a very specific light that mirrors daylight. So, when I was a kid, I'd paint like under fluorescent light, and then you'd get up in the morning, you'd take it out, and you're like, why is it so weird colored and things? And you have to correct. These are indistinguishable from what if you were to walk out in the sunlight or here. So, and the students could work 24/7 without having to worry about that. So that's a kind of cool feature.
That is really
cool. I think the architects were a little weird when we were designing this building. We're like, we want bare sheetrock everywhere. So you can pin stuff up to the wall,
right.
Because sometimes some people want to work flat at a table, some on a drawing board or a horse or others. But one of the best ways to work is just put something up on the wall and work directly on the wall.
Yep.
So that's what we're seeing here. We have
so the wall behind me. There's probably like, I don't know, 40 or 50 different charcoal and pencil and ink drawings and stuff.
Yeah.
Lots of human form, animal form, some sculpture.
Yep.
Let's see what else. Feet and hand practices.
Yep.
And some simple held objects in hands.
Yep.
Yeah. Some chess pieces.
Yep. And these are all probably from exercises in basic proportion and drawing from observation from the sort of plaster casts of classical pieces and so on. Time-honored way, some teacher demonstration stuff.
And a really nice sketch of a pair of really well broken in boots.
Yep. And I'm pretty sure that's probably the teacher's demonstration piece. So it's interesting. It's fun, actually. One of the things is sharing a space with other instructors. I sometimes see, oh yeah, that's cool what you guys are doing, and we're doing something different. Trying to think what else we would describe here.
You've got 2 mop sinks, which I think is awesome.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you gotta have.
You've got some good cabinetry and some good closet space and a really large whiteboard.
Yeah.
What are the 2 big railings? What are those?
Those are for life drawing models.
Oh, so they can be on the platform. Okay.
So we do that, and they can hold it. It's not really like a dancer's bar, but it's.
Well, I didn't see the platform underneath. If I'd noticed that, I would have immediately known.
Yeah.
But this to me seems like a pretty well outfitted room. I would enjoy practicing creativity in here.
Oh yeah, it's and like I said, it's pretty basic. And I know it's on the one hand, I tell students, your studio is a kind of headspace. You can be in your studio when you're hopefully not while you're driving, because when you're driving the car, pay attention to the road.
Right.
You got but if you're a passenger car, that can be your studio.
But it's a metaphorical space on top of having a companion physical space.
Yes.
Like you can think about
doing stuff, and you can be in but the physical studio is also not. And everybody needs a studio, even if you don't have a physical studio. Yeah. For the creatives,
there's some kind of dedicated space that you can have access to, whether it's metaphorical or literal.
Right.
There needs to be a space,
and space is time, and time is space. So
it's all a flat circle.
So you gotta, and so I try to tells you got to spend some time in your studio every day.
Yeah.
Even if it's
not literally in your studio.
Exactly.
So generally the last question I like to ask people is, who are some folks you would like to see me have on the podcast? Because I don't know everybody, and I'm curious who you would like to hear me talk to.
Denise Stewart Sanabria.
Okay.
I think she would be really. She's a friend, an artist. She is the champion of the Knoxville artist. She is so productive and so well regarded. I don't know if you know her.
I don't. I've never heard the name before.
I would love to have you.
So
talk
even
to
better.
her.
I would love. Yeah, I would love that.
I don't know if you talked to Jared Sprecher.
I have not.
At UT, he would be interesting to hear from. That's interesting. There's so many people you talk to. I'll text you some others.
Yes,
because
please.
This is the kind of question too that I'll pop awake tonight and go, oh, I should have.
Yeah, and it's kind of I won't sit here and say I don't enjoy putting people on the spot with this question because it's kind of like the one. This question is the one disjointed question from the rest of the conversation that kind of like is a separate set of information. So I kind of put people on the spot with that question, and some people will be like, well, I know 1 or 2 people, and then sometimes they'll rattle off 6 or 7, and sometimes people are just like, well, can I email you later with the list when I think of them? So all those responses are valid and acceptable. Yeah. But if you would forward me their contact information, I will gladly send them an email or a phone call and try to get something happening. But Carl, Thank you very much.
Oh,
I have
Thomas,
greatly
thank you.
enjoyed this conversation.
I've had real fun.
My name is Thomas Zachary, and this is the KAAMP. If you want to get a hold of Carl, you can find him on it. Oh, yeah. Plug your socials.
Oh,
please.
yeah. I think I'm at Carl Gombert on Instagram. It's CarlGombert, no spaces or anything. And I think Gombert Art will get a website, and either that or Carl Gombert. I'm on Facebook too.
So all that jazz, we can find you.
Yeah.
Everybody, if you want to support the man, you can buy his art. You can hang it in your house. You can tell people about him, and you can do all the same things for me and the podcast and my art. You can buy it. You can hang it in your house. You can gift it to friends. You can put the podcast in your ear holes. That's where I prefer you put it. You can't really hang it on a wall. If you want to be on the podcast, you can shoot me an email at KAAMPpodcast@gmail.com. You can hit me up on Instagram under KAAMP. You can find me on Facebook, all that jazz. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed listening. I enjoyed recording. Please have a good day.